On Father's Day, they watch a ball game and have a cookout in the backyard. And of course, we would fix that by having church, then go to a ball game, then have the cookout in the backyard. But you guys have done pretty well, so we'll take that negative off of the plate and say that here in Taylor's, South Carolina, there's not that negative. The second one is, some dads are just not perfect. I don't know if any of you run across one of those that wasn't perfect. I had a really fine dad, but truth of the matter is he wasn't perfect. There were a couple of times I saw him just a wee tiny bit less than perfect. And then there are some dads that not only are they not perfect, they're kind of bad or absent or negligent or mean or hateful, despiteful, despicable, and all kinds of things, and criminal. And all of those things are a possibility. And so there are people that really find Father's Day difficult. Not to say that there aren't some difficult mothers, because I had a mother, and there were moments and times when she was difficult. There was a saying at our house, there was not a tree anywhere within walking distance that had a limb low enough to reach, because if they did, they'd already been pulled off and used as a switch. And so my mother also was not perfect, because you know I didn't need switching that much. My brothers and sisters all did, but I did not. And so there should have been a few limbs that were still out there. It really does cause a problem. There are some people that have actually tried to say, let's just don't have Father's Day anymore in church. That would be, I think, a tremendously grave mistake, because we're bowing to something that's altogether wrong, letting the bad dads have their way. And I have actually known a few people, that usually women, who boycott Father's Day because of the father that they had, the experience that they had, just simply will not go. And these are even people that are involved in church and religious leaders, but the experience in their home was terrible. It was absolutely terrible. But I will tell you a secret. Anytime that you let something bad that happened to you continue to rule in your life, even when that person that perpetrated the bad towards you is dead, you're allowing them to still have control of your life and keep you in misery, when you ought to be able to forgive and go on. I'm not saying you should be able to forget, but you should be able to forgive and still love that person as a Christian, maybe not even as a daughter or a son. But love them like God does, redemptively, like Paul says, treat them in a way such that we might be able to gain them. But having said all that, there are some bad dads. We're doing the right thing, because there are some very good things to be said about dads, and part of that has already been sung and been said, and we're going to keep on singing and saying it, or at least saying it. In Exodus, the 20th chapter, and in Deuteronomy, the 4th chapter, God gives to us what we call the 10 Commandments. Now, if you go back and read them, you'll be scratching your head, because sometimes it seems like there's 11 or 12 of them. Some of the little summaries that we have, like out on the wall, those are not the 10 Commandments. That's a summary of the 10 Commandments. And the 10 Commandments, some of them get a wee bit long, and you can't tell if it's 1, 2, or 3. But anyway, that's where they're given, in case you want to look it up and read it. In Exodus, the 20th chapter, and Deuteronomy, the 4th chapter, we have the giving of the 10 Commandments to Moses, and therefore to us. I want to read what is said in Deuteronomy about the 10 Commandments, not necessarily the 10 Commandments themselves. In fact, I'm not going to read the 10 Commandments today, but I do want to talk about them. So in Deuteronomy chapter 4 and verse 9, talking about the commandments, I believe before they were given, it says, "Only take heed to thyself, and keep thy soul diligently, lest thou forget the things which thine eyes have seen, and lest they depart from the hearts all the days of their life. But teach them thy sons and thy sons' sons." So that which God was about to give, he said, I want you to take these very, very seriously, conscientiously, and I want you to teach them to your sons, and I want you to teach them to your grandsons. Actually, to your sons, and they will teach them to your grandsons. Many of the translations, almost all of the translations, newer translations, at that point will substitute children. Sometimes when we substitute things, it's because we believe in our culture that we are the grandest culture that has ever lived, and so it should fit into our culture. I believe actually there's a reason that the King James has sons and sons there, and there's not anything being neglected about the children at large, but in that culture, and God set some principles going, and I'll come back to that just simply do not need to be changed. So whenever you're trying to change the wording of something to make it fit our culture, give some consideration to the culture that it came out of. That may be just as valid or more valid than the one that we're trying to press it into. And I believe that happened in this particular case and in a number of cases in the newer translations. Although I like them, I use the King James mostly, but I believe this is one of those instances where a political change got made that was not necessary. Then reading in the 6th chapter of Deuteronomy, after the commandments had been given, it goes on. Now these are the commandments, the statutes and the judgments which the Lord your God commanded to teach you, that you might do them in the land where you go to possess it, that thou mightest fear the Lord thy God, to keep all his statutes and his commandments, which I command thee, that thou and thy sons and thy sons' sons all the days of thy life, and that thy days may be prolonged. In other words, keep these commandments. If you do the things that I tell you to do, you'll live a healthier and a better and a happier and a longer life. That's why when God gives us something to do, there's always a benefit for doing it. And if you read closely, you find not only the to-dos, but you find out there are the benefits that follows. Hear therefore, O Israel, and observe to do it, that it may be well with thee, and that ye may increase mightily, as the Lord God of the fathers hath promised thee, in the land that flows with milk and honey. Hear, O Israel, verse 4, the Lord our God is one Lord. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy might. Number 5 verse there is basically a synopsis of the first 4 commandments. And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart, and thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children. So that is the way it's rendered in the King James, and obviously it is intended for all of us, but he had a particular reason saying, teach your sons and your sons' sons. And thou shalt talk of them when thou sittest in your house, and thou shalt walk, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up, and thou shalt bind them for a sign upon thine hand, and they shall be as frontlets between thine eyes, and thou shalt write them on the post of thy house and on thy gates. They were kind of obsessive, weren't they? I mean, there wasn't a breath that they took that was not somehow affected by these commandments that God gave to us. And you wonder how on earth people could be so obsessed with something like that. Anything at all. You just wonder how people could go all the time and never be more than a few inches away from that which was really important to them. Why they would constantly need to be in contact with the things that were, and the people that were important to them. Why they would get up in the morning and reach for that kind of thing, the very first thing that they did. Have you seen anybody being obsessive about one of these little things? I mean, we can't breathe without it. We can't live without it. We can't sleep without it. We can't talk without it. We cannot be without it. Mine went bad the other day, and the very first thing I did was go to the store and say, get me another one. Not like the other one, it's dead. I want one that works, and so I got it. It's the only thing I know in our culture that we're that obsessed with. But this is exactly what God meant. He said, when I give you the 10 commandments, I do not want you to have a waking moment that they are not available to you. I want them there. I want them present in your life. I want them to be blinders so that whenever you see things that would distract you, you no longer see them, you see the Word. Pretty important what God had to say about the things He would have us do and the rewards that we get for doing them. I want to skip to the New Testament, to the Gospel of John, and the 5th chapter and verse 19, just one verse. Jesus is speaking. He says, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, the Son can do nothing of himself, but what he seeth the Father do. For what things soever he doth, the Father, these also do the Son likewise." Now, Jesus at this particular moment was actually talking about himself. He was defending the things he had been teaching. He was defending the things that he had been doing. And there were people who were questioning his authority. And what Jesus was explaining to them, I don't do anything on my own. If I say something, it's because God told me to say it. If I heal somebody, it's because God told me to heal them. If I go into a certain village, it's because God told me to go to that village. If I stop and talk to a Samaritan woman, it's because God told me to stop and talk to the Samaritan woman. I don't do anything on my own, is what Jesus is saying in that particular passage. However, you can make a real generalization from that because it continues to follow, even in human genetics, sons have a tendency to be a lot like their fathers. You remember the tribe of the Levites? The tribe of the Levites were chosen out to take care of the religious things. They were the great big board of trustees in Israel. They looked after the temple and everything else that needed to be looked after. And Aaron's sons became priests, and Aaron's sons became priests. And all over the world, whenever they went, and still wherever they go, they scramble around to try to be able to connect genetically some descendant to Aaron in order to be a priest, and a Levite in order to take care of the things in the temple. I don't think they're always successful, but they did that. My dad is a minister. My younger brother is a minister. I'm a minister. I have at least 2 or 3 nephews that have become ministers. It has a tendency to follow in line. My wife is a CPA. Being very bright, my boys went into business rather than into the ministry, at least thus far. But families have a tendency to procreate in the family. Carpenters raise up sons who are going to be carpenters. Bus drivers very often bus drivers. Christians very often Christians. Atheists very often atheists. What the Father does, the Son is apt to do likewise. As it was with Jesus, so it is with all the rest of us sons. We are apt to follow the steps of someone that we respect, and that very possibly can be our Father. Back to that other thought a minute ago that I want to finish. Political correctness is not always correct. And we do a lot of things in the church out of political correctness. Most of the time, I just sit back and kind of chuckle and smile to myself. I'll give you a funny, for instance, when in the Church of God, Reformation movement with general offices in Anderson, Indiana. That's us. It's been years ago when the feminist movement was really, really big. We had a motion on the floor at the General Assembly to go through our bylaws and change all of the things that says he to say he or she, so that we would not be gender specific and so that we would be politically correct with the rest of the world. That was the motion. And somebody said, well, how do you know which ones to change? Because some need changing and some don't. And they said, well, we're only going to change the ones that it's obvious that it meant he or she. And I kept quiet, but I chuckled to myself and said, if it's obvious, why do we need to change it? You know, that's just political correctness for the sake of political correctness. If it's obvious, about the same time, I was in a class, about the same time, with a little girl from China, and she read her speech, and she said something about men, humanity or something, and the teacher corrected her and said, you should say humanity, not humankind or mankind. Yeah, humanity, not mankind. And she says, our culture is thousands of years old. We got over that trivial stuff hundreds of years ago. And I thought, yay! Political correctness is whatever's okay right now, wherever you happen to be in your little cell. In Hitler's Germany, it was very politically correct to badmouth, put down, and kill Jews. You could get rewards and promotion. Political correctness in Hitler's Germany was killing Jews by the masses. Political correctness in our own slavery was owning other people and sometimes taking their lives. And that's certainly not politically correct today. And treating women like their property is politically correct almost all over our world at this very moment. Do you know that? That women are not allowed to own, women are not allowed to have, women are not allowed to talk, women are not allowed to show their face, women are not allowed to be real people. And that's politically correct in some corners of our world. Political correctness is not always correct. And when God sets some principles in motion and establishes them, we don't need to change them. We cannot change them. When God sets principles in motion, they cannot be changed. You can tinker with them all you want to. It's self-defeating to tinker with what God has set in place. In God's concept of the family, the head of the house is the husband and the father. And I know it's not real politically correct to say that, but it is biblically correct to say that. In God's principles, the head of the house is the husband and the father. He has the authority. Now, I will admit readily, he may not be the brightest person in the house. His bulb may be dim, okay? He may make bad decisions, but the monkey is on his back to make it. When you finally come down to who has to shoulder the responsibility, God set the principles in the motion that the fathers and the sons would have that responsibility. And anytime a man starts thinking that's a tremendous privilege, and I am the man and the authority, that man needs to get on his knees and pray. The bottom line is the monkey is on your back when his decision is hard to make, when it's hard to decide. First, you must step up to the line, make the decision. Gail and I actually talked about this before we were married. And I always bring this up in every one of the pre-marriage counseling I have. And Gail and I agreed. Whenever it come right down to the place that we just simply disagreed, we could not come to an agreement, I would make the decision what we would do. And then later on, we would do it right. Sometimes I made the right decisions, and sometimes later on I had to do it right. And if you are the man that God's called you to be, you will make the decision, and then later on you will admit it was wrong if it was wrong. Because you have the authority and you have the responsibility, and you really cannot change that. Although people try desperately, but it's very simple. When a man decides that he's going to delegate the responsibility for teaching his sons and his sons' sons. When a man decides that he's going to have his wife take care of the spiritual helm in the family, he's taught lesson number 1, religion and women's business. And his sons will see that, and they will not shoulder their responsibility. Whenever you delegate it to someone else, you're saying it's not your business, it's below you, or you are above it, or in many, many cases, they're better at it than you are. But when you delegate it to somebody else, you have shirked your responsibility, and you have just taught the very first lesson that's ever going to be taught about teaching your sons and your sons' sons. God set the principle in motion. I just read it. I didn't make it. Sometimes I have seen some wives that did much better job making decisions. And the husband made decision number 1 to let the wife make the decision. You got that worked out? That's perfectly okay with me. All I'm saying is when God sets it in motion, don't piddle with it. Don't change it. Don't try to change it, because it will not work. It's not politically correct to say all that, but I say it in love. I say it with a sad heart. But I think, Sam Hinton thinks, this world will be a better place when the dads get back to shouldering the responsibility that God gave them, instead of off just playing games somewhere. Bottom line, our world If our sons and our sons' sons would take the responsibility of doing what God told us to do, we would live in a happier and a healthier world than the one in which we are living. We have abdicated the authority and the responsibility that God assigned to us way too long. But there are some really, really good dads. I want to read a kind of a poetic picture of a dad who seems to have gotten it right. I didn't know him, and I don't know Holly Dunn. Holly Dunn apparently wrote this and probably sang it, says so. Dolly Parton made it popular. Daddy's hands. I remember Daddy's hands folded silently in prayer and reaching out to hold me when I had a nightmare. I could read quite a story into the calluses and the lines. Years of work and worry had left their mark behind. I remember Daddy's hands, how they held my mama tight and patted my back for something done right. There are things that I've forgotten that I loved about that man, but I'll always remember the love in Daddy's hands. Daddy's hands were soft and kind when I was crying. Daddy's hands were hard as steel when I'd done wrong. Daddy's hands weren't always gentle, but I've come to understand there were always love in Daddy's hands. I remember Daddy's hands working till they bled, sacrificed unselfishly to keep us all fed. If I could do things over, I'd live my life again and never take for granted the love in Daddy's hands. At our very best, men, we are but a reflection of our Heavenly Father. And if we are a reflection